Hello and welcome to the Business Buzz, where we take up what's happening in business, why it's important to you and our economy. I'm your host, Ryan Frazier, 9 News business expert and CEO of Frazier Global. I'm joined by my partner, Ed Sealover of the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and the editor of The Sum and Substance. Ed, how's it going at The Sum and Substance?
It is busy. Check out tsscolorado.com. You're going to see just how many things are going on in the business world.
We got a lot of stuff to cover today, everything from healthcare subsidies for millions of Americans to the poverty thresholds here in Colorado and the Rocky Mountain region. I want to start by welcoming Nick Sly, the Denver branch executive for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Nick, welcome on the show.
Ryan, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The Kansas City Fed recently published a report on poverty thresholds that caught my eye. We often hear about the official poverty rate and it's discussed as a single number, but your research shows a more complex or perhaps a nuanced picture, especially here in Colorado and the Rocky Mountain region. Nick, can you help us understand what is poverty thresholds and why it matters?
Well, we wanted to look to, like you said, have a local perspective on what it means for Coloradans, for other folks throughout the Rocky Mountain region, to be able to provide for their livelihood. And one way to think about that is a poverty threshold, meaning the amount of money that a typical household would need to spend to provide for some basic necessities, meaning being able to buy food, being able to buy shelter, utilities, and maybe a little bit of personal care. So when you think about those essential items, what a poverty threshold is, it's the amount of money they would need to be able to buy some minimum level of those items to be considered out of poverty.
Now, your report makes a very powerful point about self-sufficiency as well. What do you hope to achieve with this report?
I think we want to tell the story of how different the poverty thresholds or the challenges for low to moderate income households are from one community to another. So there are a lot of parts of Colorado where you actually see that those thresholds are somewhat like 25% higher than they might be in other parts of the country. So meaning the challenges that some of these households face in buying the basic necessities can actually be a little bit more difficult for folks in Colorado, particularly here in the Front Range, but even out to some of the mountain counties.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that everybody's talked about a lot is the idea of how tough it is to buy housing here, to even rent housing. You spoke to the Colorado Chamber's Chair's Roundtable for our members recently. And one of the things you had mentioned was the housing rates and even that the housing production is a little higher than elsewhere. How does housing figure into these poverty thresholds?
Well, as you imagine that providing for shelter, whether it's renting a home or buying a home, is one of the key parts of having a safe and secure livelihood. And so it's a key part of that poverty threshold. But it's also one of the key reasons that poverty thresholds look so different in Colorado than they do in other parts of the country. It's the higher cost of housing. And so years in the making, housing costs have been rising here in Colorado in certain counties to push those poverty thresholds up to somewhat higher levels. To put it into perspective, it'd be something like $350 to $400 a month that a typical household would actually have to have an additional income, wherever it comes from, to be able to provide for that livelihood. And that means maybe they're spending more of it on shelter.
Is there a way, as you look at Colorado compared to other places in the country, to bring that down? I mean, especially around the housing question.
And I think that the story here around housing and deliveries and the availability of housing, I think we all recognize that it's pretty well constrained here in Colorado. But we are seeing some shifts here in Colorado that look different than other parts of the country. So here in Colorado, you are seeing over the next couple of years more deliveries of rental units becoming available. You're seeing more housing availability come online compared to some other parts of the country. And that is slowing some of the rent growth, but it still means that there's some room to go before you actually get housing prices into a level on par with some other parts of the country.
Nick, I want to go back to this, how your research noted the cost of essentials kind of remain high. What does that tell us about the persistence of inflation's impact on households in our region?
Yeah, I think that's what's really helpful as a way to look at this poverty threshold, because you're looking at a number that describes how much someone has to spend or a household has to spend to provide for those basic necessities. And when those price levels go up, either if it's for food or you see utilities prices start to go up, then that's telling you that those households are persistently going to have to spend a little bit more and their incomes are going to have to grow up into it. So it gives you a benchmark to assess how much does that typical household actually have to have their income grow to be able to provide for that livelihood, sort of catch up with some of those inflationary pressures that may have happened even years in the past.
Yeah.
One of the other things I know you had mentioned is the idea that unemployment is actually now higher in Colorado than in other parts of the country as a whole, something we're not used to out here. How does that factor into that? That's got to make the poverty threshold higher to tougher to attain.
It's a little bit different because you think about who is actually unemployed, and some of the employment outcomes among service industry or among lower income or lower wage positions is actually looking a little bit tighter. But you're absolutely right. It is awfully rare, even going back decades, that Colorado would have a higher unemployment rate than the rest of the country. Some of that could be driven by the fact that we also have a little bit more of a youthful a labor force, because the headline unemployment rate that most of us are talking about, the one that's getting the headline, is a number that's looking at the number of people, is looking at the people that are looking for a job that are not necessarily sitting on the sidelines. And one of the things that's happening right now is you're seeing other parts of the country, just part of an aging demographic that's not necessarily true in Colorado, that folks that might be losing a job are actually leaving the labor force more often than they are here in Colorado. So some of it is that a younger, more vibrant labor force, people are staying engaged and continuing to look. And so that higher unemployment rate might mean that there's still that attachment to the labor force. And it can mean that it's still supportive of those households over time as they find new employment when those opportunities come.
Now, Nick, most folks have no idea all the things that the Federal Reserve does, and so whenever we've talked offline, I've always been impressed with the work you all do at the Denver branch and the Federal Reserve of Kansas City. I would like to kind of ask your thoughts on, given all the work you all do, what do you hope the community gets out of this?
I hope that there's a lot, it's maybe an odd way to think of it, but there's a lot of things that I want them to know they can take for granted. They know that when they swipe a debit card at a bank, at a grocery store, that the money's going to move from their bank account to the grocery store's bank account and they can get it. They can take for granted when they put money into a bank that their deposits are available. They're not being charged exorbitant fees. That money's not being loaned out in a way that they're not going to get it back. That they can take for granted that money is safe and secure, and also that they can take for granted that prices are going to remain, somewhat stable or grow at a predictable rate. They're not buying things in advance of some growth in prices or pushing it back. Most all of the Federal Reserve missions have some sort of stability element into them, and so I really want households to know that the stability of the financial system is secured and supported by all the public servants that are doing that work.
And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts in terms of how this information from this research, the implications for workforce stability or hiring or just the overall affordability in our state. Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, for employers is the ones we serve at the Colorado Chamber. The idea is always, how do I get the workforce I need? And part of the way you get the workforce you need is to figure out what you need to pay them. This is not about how do we lowball things. Good employers are going to say, how do I pay workers what we need? And the idea of working in this poverty threshold lets them know this is what it costs to live here in Colorado. So I think I can say from the Chamber's perspective, employers' perspective, we appreciate the research that's being done on this because that's going to help them create the salaries that are needed for people to live here.
It's interesting you say that because I too, when I looked at the research report and as a business owner myself, I look at, oftentimes we judge poverty based on income,
Right.
And this report is basically saying, there's another way to look at it, right, in terms of how much it costs to live, and the ability to achieve a certain level of sustainability, if you will, in your life, in your lifestyle. Nick, I want to give you the last word in terms of what you want our viewers to know about the work you're doing at the Fed as it relates to this report or otherwise.
I'd like them to know that in this work and in others, the real aim of this is to reflect those community perspectives in those national conversations around policy. So we want to make sure that for 40% of our population that's considered low to moderate income, that the challenges of buying affordable housing or securing food expenses and others are part of the national narrative. And part of the way that we get that conversation up to DC or to other policymakers' dialogue is by publishing reports and having these conversations. So,
Nick Sly, Denver Branch Executive of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. Thank you so much for coming on the Business Buzz to share your insights and perspective. We hope you'll come back and join us again.
Thanks, Ryan, Ed, appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
All righty, let's keep this thing moving. Enhanced federal subsidies for health insurance has a big issue these days. There's a lot that's happening in terms of the impact on people's households' budgets. And I want to talk about this with you, Ed, because there's a lot of challenges around this, how this could impact the lingering affordability problems. And state regulators are now proposing emergency rules to deal with potential premium hikes. Talk to us more about what's happening here and what's at stake.
Well, I think one of the things that people looked for in the One Big Beautiful Bill earlier this summer was what was in it. But one of the key things that insurance regulators looked at was what wasn't in it. And that wasn't extension of the federal enhanced premium tax credits. And this is money that essentially went to the states to allow them to take people who are going onto the individual market, which is more expensive than the group market because there's frankly less of a pocket of people to insure there, and to help them with their premiums. That money has been used to bring premiums down to no more than 9% of someone's income, no matter what their level of income is here in Colorado. Those are not coming back in 2026, however. And so the state has kind of been left scrambling. It has worried that, this could drive up rates 25%, 30% is what it's seen. That people without these discounts could be paying 100% more next year on their insurance costs. And so the state has kind of put into place measures that it hopes will alleviate that a little bit, but that won't go all the way to paying for what these credits paid for.
Yeah, so Ed, you're with the Chamber of Commerce. From a chamber's perspective, maybe you could shed some light on how does this level of uncertainty around healthcare costs affect the decision-making of small business owners or an entrepreneur?
Or large business owners. Frankly, this has a domino effect that goes throughout here. This affects the individual market. These are largely people who work for smaller companies and who don't get insurance for their companies because that's an expensive price to pay for some companies to operate at a small market, as much as insurance tries to keep the price down. And that those people are going to be directly affected. But the fact is, the state estimates as many as 100,000 people are going to drop insurance from the private market because they're not getting the help they used to with this. If those folks drop insurance, you're going to see more people going into to emergency rooms to get care. They're going to be uninsured, and they're going to have a hard time paying much of any of their bills. If they can't pay, those hospitals are going to have to get the money somewhere, and they're going to cost shift, and they're going to charge more for services to people who have private insurance, usually through employers, and that's going to be reflected in higher premiums. So everybody should be watching what's going on here because it affects both individuals and businesses of all sizes.
Real quickly, remind us again, as of now, where is this at in terms of is it a done deal that these subsidies are going away? When is that? What's the timing of that?
There is still a chance there could be a separate bill that passes to reinstate these subsidies for 2026. But the thought was, if it's not in the one big beautiful bill, as it was known, it's not going to happen. So in all likelihood, the state is already moving ahead, planning for these to not exist next year. That's why some of the things it's doing is it's giving, taking money that it has in an enterprise that it gets from charging fees on every insurance policy sold in this state, and it's putting a little bit more to anyone who makes 200% federal poverty level or below, giving them a little bit more help than they would have gotten otherwise, but especially that 200 to 400% federal poverty level group, and that's people who could be making up to $128,000 for a family of four. They are going to see very little help coming in for them, and so those are the people that have to start planning for how am I going to get these much more to pay for insurance, and what do I really want to do with my insurance needs.
So, okay, let me play the devil's advocate here for just a second.
Play away.
Too, right? So, obviously, no one likes cuts. No one likes, federal spending to go down because there's implications, there's impacts, real impacts on real people, as I like to say. Now, the other side of that is there's got to be some cuts in spending. The federal government needs to get its spending under control. What's the upside here? Is there an upside here that those who advocate for these reductions are making at all?
I will warn you, I am not someone who covers the federal government very closely, and I haven't seen a lot of particular discussions on why it's good that these go away. But this is part of the bigger, we need to get our budget in shape. That's a tome you hear at county levels, city levels, state levels, as well as the federal level. So I think this is a little bit, we need to rein this in a little bit here. One of the other areas people should be watching for is a bill died in the 2025 legislative session that would have allowed the health insurance affordability enterprise to raise the fees that go toward programs like this. That may come back, and there will be a great debate then on do people of Colorado really want to pay more in fees on their insurance premiums, or is this something we need to figure out how to do more with less spending?
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot of arguments for cutting these subsidies. Now, that said, to your point earlier, and we certainly have all heard this, the federal government needs to get its spending under control. The debt and deficit situation continues to spiral out of control in many cases, but is it right to make those cuts on the backs of programs like this and the implications it has for so many millions of Americans is a fundamental question, I think, that Congress and ultimately the state will have to reconcile. And businesses clearly have a vested interest in how this will impact their employees. So, Ed, we got to run from the future of healthcare subsidies to the reality of poverty in our state. There's been plenty impacting the business community and Coloradans in our region. For our viewers, our goal is for you to stay informed, to be engaged, and to get ahead of the game. So be sure to stay tuned for more in-depth business discussions and news on the Business Buzz. For 9 News, for Ed Sealover, I'm Ryan Frazier. See you next time.